Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the Future Cities leader for Ernst & Young, Mr. George Atalla, and his guests.
So good morning, everyone. Wonderful to be here with you at this session. We have a fantastic panel and a wonderful discussion that's going to start. This session is Better Business: How can global CEOs support the UN's Sustainable Development Goals? My name is George Atalla. I lead EY's government and public sector business, and I'm looking forward to this session. I'll quickly introduce my panelists, starting from my left. Dr. Ziad Abu Gharara is the Secretary General of the Regional Organization of the Conservation of the Environment of the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. Sitting next to him is Alex Dmitriev. He's the President and CEO of GE Global. Right next to him is Mr. Paul Holtis. He's the CEO of the World Ocean Council. Right next to him is Dr. Mahmoud Khan, who is PepsiCo's Vice Chairman and Chief Scientific Officer. Then we have Marianne Legnaud, and Marianne is Group Senior Executive Vice President, International Division at EDF. And then last but not least is Mr. Søren Schroeder, who's the Group CEO of Bunge Limited. So welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining this panel. So before we get started, just a few words about sustainable development and why is this important. And more specifically, we'll talk about how did this come about and why does the UN have the Sustainable Development Goals. So sustainable development in general has been addressing a behavior, a bad behavior that we've had in the past, which is the pursuit of growth at any cost. And in fact, when you think about it, if you look at most economies, when we look at the world economy, the first thing we look at is gross domestic product, GDP. We also rank countries by GDP, and we look very closely at GDP growth rates. And this actually misses a key point of sustainable development and growth, which is at what cost is this growth coming? How are we depleting natural resources? How are we affecting the environment? So in the 1970s and the 1980s, some thinkers, economists started thinking about this problem. And this idea, this concept of sustainable development came about. So the main concept behind it is how can we promote development while at the same time safeguarding, protecting the earth for future generations. So not to actually develop at the cost of depriving others of the same benefits and resources that we have benefited from. And that concept has taken hold. And then, the next step beyond this is, can you pursue sustainable development while at the same time having a good business, making money, running a successful enterprise? So this is what we've been thinking about. Now, if you think about the problem, and why is this an important problem? The population of the Earth today is over 7 billion people. About half of that population comes from Asia. In 2100, we are expecting the population of the Earth to grow to 11 billion people. Most of that growth, in fact, 3 billion of this additional growth, will be coming just from one continent, from Africa. A lot of people will be moving out of poverty into a more consumption mindset, so consumption of energy, food consumption, etc. This is going to cause an additional burden. The United Nations in 2015 came up with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and each one of those goals has a number, I think in total 169 targets. And those goals address economic development, social development, environmental protection. So they've been far more comprehensive than the United Nations Millennium Development Goals that the UN had introduced about 20 years before. So this is the change. And this is what we are going to try to do today, is ask this very important question. Can you manage a sustainable development growth trajectory while at the same time running a successful business? And what are businesses doing today to address this new dynamic. And I think we have the best panel that I could have thought of. In fact, I'm personally excited to hear what they're going to say. I don't know what they're going to say, but this is something that I'm actually excited about. This is a very important question that I'm sure many of you will be facing. And this is our opportunity to actually hear from our panelists about what could be some of the solutions and what they've encountered in their own corporations. So let me start off with you, Alex. GE is a global conglomerate. You work in multiple countries. And I'm sure you face the challenge of how can a company that's looking at technology and infrastructure be sustainable running a business. So can you tell us a little bit how you've been thinking about it at GE?
Thank you. And first, let me begin by saying that it's a privilege to be here to address such an important topic that affects all of the 180 countries in the world where GE is privileged to do business. This is an area actually where our customers challenged us years ago to improve. And what we found was that there was a demand from our customers and their customers around the world for environmentally friendly technology across the entire portfolio of GE's businesses. And so in 2005, we launched an initiative that we called Eco-Imagination, where we endeavored to work with our customers to develop emission-reducing technology across our entire portfolio of power generation products, and also aircraft engines and other technologies that we partner with our customers on. And what we found was actually that many of our customers were ahead of regulators on these issues. And during yesterday's sessions, I think we heard many speakers give very compelling presentations about the challenges ahead in the world where urban areas might concentrate as much as 65 to 70% of populations of certain countries. And so the imperative to reduce emissions is something that we all embrace. And the color of the United States dollar is green, and what we have come to say is that green can be green, and that it can be a very fruitful endeavor for a partnership between us and our customers. And so since 2005, we have sold over $270 billion of emission-reducing technologies, which is audited by third parties to make sure that we, in fact, are honoring our commitments to reduce emissions. We publish this on our website to be very transparent. And this has continued and accelerated over the years. And I think that what's striking about the COP21 agreement that was reached in Paris is, again, that our customers around the world are actually ahead of regulators. And I'm not sure who's trying to keep up with whom, the people of the world or the regulators that reach agreements like Paris. So we are optimistic about the future, and we are optimistic about our technologies. And this applies across the entire portfolio. Renewables are incredibly important as part of this mix: wind, hydro, solar. But also, in terms of sustainable economic development, there are parts of the world that will continue to need to use coal, will continue to need to use nuclear, will continue to use steam. As is excellently Kalahavala said yesterday, we do have gas as an important part of the equation, and it will be for the foreseeable future. But the only other thing I'd add is that there's a human capital development to sustainability too. And we had many discussions yesterday about how technology is affecting training in the future, but there are collateral positive benefits to this too in terms of the development of human capital. Look to additive manufacturing and what is being done with 3D printing around the world. And so at GE, we have provided 1,000 3D printing machines for polymers to primary and secondary schools in 30 countries around the world. We have provided additive metal manufacturing systems to 13 universities across the world. So 400,000 students are going to be exposed to additive manufacturing and technology. And they will be positioned to continue to disrupt technologies. They will be empowered to equip small and medium enterprises, to challenge companies like GE to continue to improve our sustainable products. So I choose to be a big optimist about the future here, and I think sustainability is a very promising path forward for GE and our competitors around the world.
Thank you, Alex. And one thing that you mentioned that I hope we'll come back to later on in this panel is who's actually ahead. Is it the consumers or is it the regulators? Because certainly there is, I sense, a global shift in thinking as well. So Mahmoud, let me jump to you. And this is by no means a plug for Pepsi, but I have to say, I have to admit that I've been in countries where it was easier to get a bottle of Pepsi than to find clean drinking water. So the supply chain that Pepsi runs seems to be working very well. But again, I am sensitive of the challenges that you have in running such a supply chain and such global operations. How do you inject sustainability in it?
So we've been on this sustainability journey now for over a decade. And we launched this initially in 2007 with our Performance with Purpose. Let me just take a step back. While we're a global company, we operate in 200 countries. We bring sustainability in our operations to life in every country that we operate. So let's take Saudi Arabia, for example. In this country, with our partners, we employ about 15,000 people. We support 3,000 farmers. So if we're going to bring sustainability to life in this country or any other country, it's the local community, the local supply chain that we have to influence, guide, and where necessary, invest in and develop. So that's the sort of scope side of it. And of course, the advantage of a global company like ours is while we're operating locally, we can bring our global R&D resources, our global know-how to life through that. And it's that matrix. Now, if we think about what you've just said, the world's population by 2050 is what, about 9 billion people. That 2 billion people isn't just adding 2 billion people. As you know, about 70% of the world's population will have urbanized by then. So from a food point of view, the distance between people who produce food, the farmers, and the consumers, that's going to go from where it used to be historically just tens of miles, now literally hundreds and thousands of miles. So in every country on the planet now, that food supply chain is very complex. We have three major things to think about. The water use, and we estimate if we don't change anything, we're going to have to increase water demand by agriculture by about 40%, which is not possible since agriculture uses, 80% of the planet's fresh water. So we have to change our water practices. And the second is the input costs. Farming and agriculture is one of the heaviest tolls on greenhouse gas production. So now the question is, how can we implement this? Well, let me give you a couple of examples, and I think we'll get into more details later. We've rolled out an initiative as an example called the Sustainable Farming Initiative, where we actually now digitally, with the farmers, tracking the amount of water they use, the nitrogen, fertilizer, pesticide, their yield rates, labor practices, and as a result, we're starting to get a global map of what our supply chain looks like. To give you an idea of the scope, we already have rolled this out in 33 countries around the world. And our goal is that eventually, by 2025, this will represent 75% of PepsiCo's global agricultural footprint. That's about 7 to 8 million acres across somewhere like 40 to 50 countries. As a result, we actually will know what's going on and be able to influence it. So I think the partnerships are one thing, but actually learning to integrate your operations in that prospective manner is key. The other is the output side. Communicating with the consumer, and you raise this question, who's ahead, the communicator or the regulator? Depends. On some issues, the consumers are way ahead of the curve, and we're trying to keep up, which is great. The consumer is pulling us there. In some cases, we need the regulator to give us the swim lane and the guardrails within which to operate, and frankly, level the playing field. A combination of those two allows us to both talk to the consumer, deliver them products that they like, as you say, in every country, everywhere you go. And remember, for a company like PepsiCo, the Pepsi brand is about 1/10 of my business. The other 90% is foods, beverages, and we've got to have a very complex, diverse supply chain to manage.
Mm-hmm. So Mahmoud, one of, again, another point that I hope we'll come back to later on is how much water agriculture uses. And the importance of food. So I'm thinking, over 100 years ago, there was this forecast that the planet, people will run out of food. And I think that's been proven wrong. And I'm coming to you, Paul, on this question. One of the reasons, people have looked at the oceans as an inexhaustible supply of food. And this has prompted all sorts of bad behaviors towards the oceans. And we see some of the degradation that's happening all around the world. As you look at that problem, again, and within your organization, how do you address the problem of sustainability, given that many people look at the ocean as an inexhaustible supply of food?
Yeah, well, this, it really is germane to this discussion about sustainability, the role of the ocean, and since the ocean covers 71% of the planet, maybe I'll take 71% of the time to explain all that. But to really focus on that role, we've got a huge global ocean economy with $24 trillion worth of assets, and maybe estimates up to $7 trillion in economic activity every year. So if the ocean was a country, it would be akin to Germany in terms of the size of the GDP. The food piece of that is just one part of this very diverse use of the ocean as part of the global economy. So we've got food, we've got minerals, we've got water from desalination, we've got transport, we've got energy, of course. So let me start with your question about food. Through both wild capture fisheries and aquaculture, the ocean is providing a huge amount of protein, particularly in developing countries. And we have challenges with fisheries, as you say. It's a big ocean, and a lot of companies operating need to take the leadership and provide the implementation of responsible practices, because we will not have a regulator, a police officer on every fishing boat. We need business leadership, and this has already come out so clearly here this morning, that it's the role of business to really identify those and work with the regulators, the governments, the science community, the environment community, and others to identify best practices, and particularly in the ocean situation, to implement those and report on those in ways that are credible and independent. So aquaculture is coming up now as fisheries are sort of leveling off and really facing these challenges of becoming more clearly responsible and tracking supply chains. In terms of complex supply chains, the fishing one is particularly complex. Aquaculture, though, is in terms of investment opportunities. This has been the fastest growing food production system of any kind on this planet for the last couple of decades, 7.5% on average for the last 20 years. So important opportunities for both providing food to a growing planetary population, as you pointed out, but doing it well and doing it sustainably, and having the investment community supporting that. The water side comes in as well as desalination becomes more important. Desalination has been doubling every 20 years, and particularly important in this part of the world, of course. We've got a global economy that's helping from the ocean, that's helping sustain us in terms of our transport. We've got 90% of goods that trade internationally go aboard vessels, and a lot of this includes part of the food supply chain, as well as we'll hear from the agricultural sector, as the agri-commodity sector as well. And we've got the telecom side of things, for example, the ocean. Any of you that are on your smartphones right now and communicating internationally, you're part of the ocean economy. 98% of internet traffic internationally is going via submarine cable. 100 million kilometers of, a million kilometers of submarine telecom cables. And I won't even go into the energy side. I think we all know the importance of offshore oil and gas, and increasingly, as has come up, the renewables as part of what's going to sustain our planet as we move into a gas-based economy, and huge amounts of the gas resources are offshore, and there's ways to extract and develop that sustainably and responsibly. But increasingly, as we heard, the wind, the wave energy, et cetera, huge investment and development opportunities to deal with these sustainability challenges. There's 45,000 terawatts of potential wave energy available for the planet. And in the meantime, the offshore wind is growing, doubling some years in some parts of the world. So I'd really emphasize that potential for the ocean economy and ocean resources to really be helping deliver on sustainability challenges, the SDGs, and that there are a lot of great people in great companies that are part of that and really working to implement that view of and that vision of sustainable development from the ocean side.
And this is something that I'd love to come back to with Marianne, in fact, and EDF's strategy around renewables and wave energy. Not yet, I'll come to you in a second, but in wave energy and actually the wind farms now that you see all over. But while we're on the topic of oceans, let me ask you, Ziad, because if I look at the Red Sea, I mean, we were mentioning about population growth and how a lot of that is going to be happening in Asia and in Africa. And I look at the Red Sea, and this is going to be, I mean, not only a place where we see a lot of development, but it also has been a passage between, you know, the East and the markets in Europe, and vice versa, in fact. So how can you support, maintain development in the Red Sea, knowing that your organization is looking very much at the environmental damage and at the priorities that you need to be looking at when it comes to the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden?
Thank you, George. Just before responding to your question, let me introduce PERSIGA first. It is an intergovernment regional organization dedicated for the conservation of the marine environment of the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. It is based in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and we have a response center in Hurghada in Egypt. With respect to development in the Red Sea, you know the Red Sea is a very unique ecosystem. It is one of the best and the cleanest sea in the world. It is known with its high biodiversity. There are more than 1,200 species of fish in the Red Sea, and also known with the coral reefs. 300 species of coral reef exist in the Red Sea, and these species, they are endemic to the Red Sea. It means that you cannot find some of these in other seas. So the Red Sea has a good potential for development or for investment. Now, many countries nowadays, they go towards the investing in the sea. Some of them, they generate more than 20% of the GDP actually from the activities and development related to the sea. And now, given that it's the Red Sea, based on all of this, the Red Sea has high potential for investment. But what we want this investment to be sustainable investment. Like we have to really meet our economic growth objectives as well as the conservation objectives. So we have to meet both at the same time, because the assets actually for this project is the health and productivity of the marine ecosystem. So in order to really protect your investment, you need to have good conservation. Now, let us see what policy we can make in order to achieve that. We can, for example, try to reduce or limit the utilization of the marine resources, and also cut on the pollution discharges to the marine environment. We need to use what is called marine spatial planning. That is, you have to coordinate all the activities or the development projects in the Red Sea, so we can develop a type of synergy between these projects and avoid conflict between these developments. Even this coordination can go up to maybe member states bordering the Red Sea, because whatever happens in one state, it will affect the others. So we have to establish some type of coordination between the countries. Now, good governance is really essential. You have to have good legislation, you have to have policy, and at the same time, you have to have good implementation capabilities. Like, for example, you need technical capabilities, you need also personnel or specialized people that can implement these policies. Now, once this is done, then you are sure that your development will be sustainable, and you have blue economy as well as you conserve your marine environment.
Excellent, thank you. And Marianne, let me come to you. Because we, and Mahmoud mentioned it, and I think we all agree that increasing population and people moving out of poverty is going to require more energy consumption and utilization. And then, I've been in many countries where I've heard it said that, we have a lot of coal. Why don't we just use the coal that we have instead of resorting to more expensive renewables, whether it's wind or solar or wave. And, even in the past, the hydropower, which used to be popular in the past, even that now is being put into question because of environmental reasons. How do you deal with it? Because this, for your business, I mean, you want to do the right thing, but you also understand the economics. And so how do you address that problem?
Good morning, George. Good morning to all of you. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you as EDF, which is a worldwide utility, has teams and offices in Riyadh since 2012, so really a great pleasure. Your question, it's a key question for utilities, George, because as we all know, climate change is a huge challenge. There's no time to waste in order to fight it, and energy is the main source today of emissions of greenhouse gas. So we are also deeply convinced that in order to reach the Paris Agreement, of course, governments, regulators have a great part to play, but it's also on the shoulders of large cities, of large companies, on citizens, and amongst these companies, of course, for utilities, it's not just only about CSR, corporate social responsibility. Yes, it is, but mainly it's about strategy and business. So what we have to do, what a company like EDF is doing, is to put this sustainability goal at the very heart of its strategy and business. And let give you some examples about that, about our commitments. EDF, because we want to be and to become the leader on CO2-free energy supply for clients and on the generation side as well, we committed ourselves to divide our CO2 emission measured per ton from 50 last year, decrease to 30 by 2030, because EDF has also a vision and a plan for 2030. And in this plan, we also committed to increase the renewable part of our mixed. You mentioned renewable. I'm sure we come back to that in a few minutes. And to increase our renewable generation, to double it, in fact, to move from 28 gigawatt up to 50 gigawatt by 2030. So these are precise commitments, because I am deeply convinced that you have to measure things in order to make progress, not to just do some greenwashing, but also to commit ourselves and to have business objectives. That's why, of course, as you mentioned, the mixed, and George said it as well, has to be, the energy mix has to be a balance between renewables and nuclear. Nuclear is also CO2 free, and we are the largest operator of nuclear fleet in the world. We are also building new nuclear, of course in France, but also in UK, in China, and we are also answering to the Kingdom demands regarding new nuclear. So it has to be a balanced, mixed, and in France, we took also strong commitments in order to tackle this climate change challenge by issuing a huge plan in, let's say, in three parts. First pillar is a solar plan to develop 30 gigawatt in France by 2030. Second pillar is about storage, because storage is also part of the solution in order to fight this climate change and to provide a mix of base load generation and storage. So we announced a large storage plan, and we want to have key positions in terms of batteries and storage, or You mentioned hydro. There are also hydro solutions for storage and combination and dam and storage and pumpage. And finally, we announced also an electric mobility plan in order to become the leader in terms of supply of electric vehicles, but also of smart charging and smart batteries. So for EDF, it's really at the core of its strategy to deliver that commitment, to measure it, to make progress. And that's why we took 3 internal CSR engagement commitments. You mentioned the 17 from the UN. Our 6 commitments are deeply linked with this UN 17 sustainable goal. I mentioned already CO2 emission. It is a strong commitment because it means exiting from coal. So we sold our coal plants in Western Europe, for example. It means also, you mentioned also customers, and some of my colleagues mentioned customers, clients. Client customers, they have strong expectations in terms of energy transition, green energy. They want to be part of it. They want to be part of a solution. So our commitment is also to provide our customers with safe and competitive, affordable, digital offers in order for them to be part of the solutions. And we should not look only on the supply and generation side, but also on the demand side. So it's not only about generating green energy, it's also about saving energy, about using it better, at better time in the day, for example, by having a complementary between nuclear, for example, and solar and wind, between baseload, hydro, and solar and wind, for example, and bringing energy efficiency to our clients, and that's why we are also looking at some business in the region.
And you mentioned demand as well, managing demand. And you know, when I think about the UN's Sustainable Development Goal, you'll find that there are some related to water, some related to hunger, right? So the availability of food, and this is why I want to come to you, Søren, about this. But also there are some, there's another one on reducing waste, for instance. Yes. And so, Søren, you know, when we start thinking about food security, and you know, this topic has been getting a lot of, you know, attention lately. And if I think about, you know, the thinking over 100 years ago was that, you know, there would be world famine because the population is increasing and we just won't have enough food. And I think that concept has been proven wrong. You know, there is no world famine. You could argue that food is not properly distributed between regions, but overall, I think there is enough right now to cover everyone. But then you have the water shortage or the water utilization, and then climate change, as we were alluding to. Where do you see technology coming in? And I have to, you know, again explain, Bunge is one of the largest agribusinesses in the world. So where does technology come in for you? And how do you address sustainability and food security from that point of view?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, first of all. It's a pleasure to be here. You're right, we play a large role in feeding the world, either directly or indirectly. We connect areas of surplus to areas of deficit. We connect harvests to homes, so to speak. And you don't have to go back 100 years to have the doomsday predictions of running out of food. All you have to go back to is 2008, 2010, when prices were so high and food inflation was the main source of angst in many parts of the world. At that time, there was a real question, can we feed 9 billion people or more by 2050? My belief is that we can. We have the technologies to do that today, and we will have even more as we move along. And some of the areas where you can see that coming to life as we speak is first of all, the digital revolution in precision agriculture. There's a whole new world out there where farmers and users of grain are connected digitally in powerful ways that allows them to make better decisions and optimize what they do in a sustainable way. The second one is the improvement of seed. There's no question in my mind that gene editing plays a very large role in supplying the world with food in a sustainable way going forward. And that gene editing technology is available to many more than it ever has been. You know, the cycle time is shorter, the investments required are less to create seeds that are just right for a particular region or create the right output, so to speak, from the perspective of the consumer. A third area that is developing rapidly is how microbes can be used to improve soil health, seed health, but also be used in later stage processing of raw materials in the food industry, again, in a way that increases productivity and improves sustainability. And then finally, within sort of the consumption, the consumer side, there's a revolution going on there too. Health is at the top of the list. People everywhere, not just in wealthy nations, are much more aware of health as it relates to what they eat and how they consume than ever before. And that's a good thing. Many companies are reformulating their products as a result of this, and there are novel foods being marketed as we speak. Plant-based protein alternatives to meat are available now with similar taste and texture profiles as the real thing. Who would have thought? It's too expensive perhaps for some today, but I think that's just a matter of time and scale before it becomes a real alternative for many. So I'm absolutely convinced that we will get there in a good way, and that technology and innovation and disruption is all part of this journey at a pace that we've never seen before. In the 30 years I've been in the agricultural business, I've never seen so much opportunity in front of us as I see right now. The question is, from a sustainability perspective, is all that enough? Every single one of the 4 areas that I mentioned contribute somehow to improve sustainability, but is it enough? I don't think anybody really knows, but it is all in the right direction. What we do to contribute, let's say what we can control out of all this, on top of being good stewards of our asset base and so forth, is to make commitments around where agriculture is developed and how it's developed. So one of the biggest sources of, let's say, negative sustainability is deforestation in the agricultural supply chains. And we have, along with others in our industry, made commitments that between 2020 and 2025, we will eliminate deforestation from our supply chains. That's a big statement. It's a big leap in a way. We have good ideas of how we get there. When we made the commitment, it wasn't so clear, but sometimes you have to jump out in front, and that's what we've done. We find that it's better to work with partners in these areas. So for example, in Brazil, which is a big surplus area of production, and also one of the areas that's being challenged a lot on deforestation, we've partnered up with the Nature Conservancy, and recently with Bank Santander to create a farmer finance program that encourages farmers by giving them subsidized credit to go into those areas that are not controversial. So, you know, we can each make our contributions, and that is one in which we've decided to make a step forward.
Paul, you wanted to add something?
Just to build on this theme of the role of digitalization and technology and innovation in linking with business operations and sustainability regarding logistics and supply chains, for example. Certainly in the vast expanses of the ocean and the industries that operate there, this has become a huge movement over the last number of years, some calling it the digital ocean, and the role of big ocean data, the use of cloud computing, and increasingly AI to help industries that operate in the ocean. And to use an example of the shipping industry with 80 to 90,000 vessels that, as I was saying, providing 90% of trade, to keep track of those vessels, to understand how those vessels are interacting with the marine environment around them, to monitor and track pollution situations, to prevent the incidents and emergencies that lead to pollution. So really using technology on vessels, the connection of those vessels and platforms through satellite technology to the cloud computing possibilities to really understand what's going on to operate more safely, more responsibly, and dealing with security issues as well. And just to give a very specific example briefly, is that increasingly through our organization, the World Ocean Council, bringing these leadership companies together to install sensors, instrumentation on vessels, on platforms that then automatically are recording information about ocean conditions, about pollution conditions, about the weather and climate above those platforms and vessels, and feeding that through to the international science community that then comes back through to the operations of fleets as they're carrying out that important global transport function.
And that's fascinating, because actually I'm looking at you, Alex, here, because Paul was mentioning the power of data. And I think, you know, when I think about GE and, for instance, the Predix platform that you have, some of the work on sensors, on using sensors to monitor, you know, the Internet of Things actually is taking on a whole new life. How is that, you know, in your thinking, helping accelerate the sustainability agenda?
So I think that we've only begun to scratch the surface in terms of the potential of big data and the connectivity of machines with people around the world to optimize how we use our supply chains, how companies build the things that they build, how we regulate our internal activities to optimize inventory and other issues, but most importantly, to help our customers optimize their fleets of equipment. And that not only promotes sustainability in terms of efficient use of equipment, but also helps people with long-term planning to make sure that when we deploy electricity on the grid, we're using it in places where we need to be. And it facilitates the introduction of wind and solar and other intermittent sources of power into a grid. And so some estimates say that the industrial Internet of Things is going to add 15 to 20 trillion with a T, dollars worth of GDP to the world economy by 2030, and everything we see says that that's correct. But, you know, I'd like to emphasize another thing, which is sustainability is about more than just environmental progress. And the Strategic Development Goals of the United Nations also talk about creating opportunity for high-quality jobs. And when you look at how the world operates right now, and you examine a company like GE, where we have the privilege of doing business in over 180 countries around the world, there is a growing and rightful expectation that part of doing business in a country is creating high-quality, meaningful opportunities for sustained employment and development. And there were two examples that I can give you just from where I was on my way to Saudi Arabia. I stopped in India and I stopped in Ukraine. And in both of those countries, our transportation business has invested in local facilities in partnership with local suppliers in a way that will improve standards of living and create opportunities for future growth within those countries. In India, we have constructed a new locomotive facility in Bihar, one of the poorest regions in the country. That has entailed not only building a factory, but working with local partners to create new housing, which will improve quality of life. It is creating jobs in India for the foreseeable future, and in the process, delivering 1,000 environmentally friendly diesel locomotives to India for the foreseeable future. In Ukraine, the story is similar, where we are working with local partners to develop locomotives with up to 40% local content in Ukraine that, again, will not only improve the environment, but create high-quality, lasting jobs within Ukraine. And I think that I could give you hundreds of other examples from the hundreds of other countries where investment in local capabilities and human capital is really part and parcel of the bargain and the obligation that a company like GE has to promote sustainable development around the world.
And it must be something that Pepsi as well must be dealing with, right?
Well, let's bring this to life for the average person. If we think about a simple thing like growing potatoes, we did an experiment, beyond an experiment, a real field initiative in Europe, where we asked this question, because how are we going to feed this population as years come by with this diminishing water? We set about and set a goal. We said, we're going to set up some farms that existingly operate, and we're going to take all the technology that's available today, not invent anything new, just deploy what's already been invented, but bring it together in an integrated manner. Sensors, digital mapping, the latest technology on the breeds and varieties, microbiome, and then measure water consumption on the farm, inputs like nitrogen and pesticide, but do this in a manner with two goals. One, we're going to reduce the water use per acre by 50%. Not 5% or 2%, a 50% reduction in water, 50% reduction in nitrogen and greenhouse gas production, and third, not diminish the yield. However, we're going to achieve it in 5 years, not 50 years, in 5 years. We set that initiative, partnered with the university to audit and work with us. Well, guess what, George? In less than 5 years, water use went down by less than half, we reduced the inputs by half, and yield actually went up. What does that tell you? It tells us that we have the capability today on the planet, we have the technology and the know-how, we don't need to invent anything, we just need to develop integrated systems and actually have the will to deploy with the capital that's available on the markets. So if we can mobilize the financial system and the know-how across multiple industries, this is a global challenge that can be solved. It's not something that's impossible. The question is, are the decision makers willing to come together and actually have the will to make it happen?
Right, and I think, and this is why I want to come to you, Soren, on this, because you mentioned, how you're influencing, Mahmoud, and how you're putting some metrics, in fact, to measure where you want to get to. And if I think about, farming in general, with increasing urbanization and people actually moving away from farms into cities, okay, this is the biggest, one of the bigger challenges that we have, this increasing urbanization and people moving away from farms. And if you start thinking, Soren, about what can we do, how can policymakers put in the right policies to encourage some of the behaviors that Mahmoud described? Because not everyone works with Pepsi. In fact, if you look at many countries around the world, the average farm is a quarter of an acre, half an acre. I mean, these are very small farms. So how do you inject those policies that allow this disruptive technology to be implemented?
That's a good question. I think what the digital revolution is doing today in agriculture is creating a kind of transparency we've never seen before. A few years ago, we were part of building a pilot in the US called Field to Market, which was really in a defined, very large area to allow farmers from different farms to see their, let's say, their neighbors' productivity metrics around water use, fertilizer, pesticides, all the things that go into production, with the purpose of, without sort of pointing fingers at anybody, trying to adopt best practices within a region. Today, that is available on a number of sites or platforms that connect all the data that Mahmoud talked about. Sensors, historical data, a farmer's own history of production, in such a powerful way that you can now go in and, with the help of digital tools, fine-tune your production in a pretty powerful way. I think that is much more effective than regulation, frankly, and it is, at the end of the day, economics that drive that decision-making. I can't imagine what it would look like if you ended up regulating each one of those metrics. It would not be a good thing. In fact, I would say that one of the most important things to unleash the potential of sustainable agriculture is actually having very free, open, and connected markets where price signals are the ones that determine which way to go. I also think that the ability of this digital insight to be spread to small stakeholders is there today in a way that it wasn't a few years ago. All of the information I'm talking about is available on an iPhone or a smartphone of some sorts, and can be transferred in a way that it never was possible before to places like Africa, where it is really small stakeholder farming that will make the difference over the next 30 years.
And Marianne, and I want to come to you, Ziad, to finish up, but I want to ask you a question before I come back to Ziad. So you mentioned demand when you discussed, because, this entails behavioral changes, right, mainly on the consumer side. Because the other option, which is keep increasing supply, we all know is not sustainable. So there has to be the other side of the equation, which is how do you manage demand? What have you seen that has worked, either in EDF's experience or worldwide, to encourage better demand management?
Yeah, that's of course a key question, and my colleagues have underline the role of agriculture. And of course, there's a strong connection between energy and agriculture. We have pictures of African village here. And digitalization, smart business, listening to customers' demands. I can give you an example of what we can achieve in order to connect all these aspects. In Africa, maybe you know that half of the population has no access to electricity. Or for growth, of course, you need energy, and you need clean energy for sustainable growth. So what we did at EDF, we developed a new business in some African countries, not all of them, but some of them, by providing and selling what is called a solar home system. So these are decentralized and digital kits, combination of a solar panel and batteries in order to charge your phones, to view TV, to listen to radio, and to put light in your farms, for example, or for your children to studies at night. And so we created from start, in 2 years, a B2C business in Africa. Mm-hmm. And our clients, they are paying us by mobile money with their phone. So we have partners with telecom as well. And we have a rate of payment around 90%. So it is also a good business. And doing this, and I'm come back to my previous point, we are replacing CO2 emission ways of heating or generating electricity like kerosene, petrol, paraffin by a solar system. So it's CO2-free, it's agile, it's profitable, and the clients, they are asking for new products. So it's an
really
evolving mechanism. So you answer their needs. They grow, their farms grow, and they have new needs, new demands, new requirements, and then you can increase and have a sustainable growth.
And that's fascinating, right? Because it's an entirely, it's a change in your basic operating model, right? Where you're going, you're selling to consumers directly, right? With those solar kits that
Yes, and our view is that, of course, you have to keep a part of centralized generation with nuclear, for example, with hydro as well, but also to move to decentralized solutions using more digital as well.
So, Ziad, Marianne mentioned, a different, approach that they're using, right? If you were to look at the last few years, what can you point to as, successful policies that have helped the preservation of the Red Sea, and, whether they've been adopted or implemented, but what do you see, as really some good success points?
Let me go to the point of the food security. As you know, the Red Sea is not very rich with the resources, living resources. So we have seen overexploitation of the marine resources, overfishing. And for that, we need a regional effort. Like one country cannot control the illegal and unregulated fishing. So we had a protocol initiated by the member states, and the protocol was really very helpful in tackling this problem. We also encourage the aquaculture or industrialization of production of the fishery. So I think this was one of the good. Also, the regional coordination between member states really helped a lot in the capacity building in the region, technology transfer, and also in mitigating the pollution loads to the marine environment, which is essential for sustainable development. Unless you have good control and zero, for example, zero discharge to the marine environment, then you will destroy your resources, which is the assets for the investment as a whole.
And for future growth, of
yes.
course.
So, just to conclude, I would like to just mention very briefly that the Saudi vision most of the policies were incorporated in the Saudi mission, and this is in Persig, we appreciate the vision, and we are very pleased to see that incorporated.
So it's a national
it will help, yes, it will help the sustainability in all over the Red Sea.
Excellent, thank you. I'm looking at the timer. I'm not sure. I'm looking at the organizers. Do we have 5 minutes for Q&A, or? If no one answers me, I assume that the answer is yes. All right, no one answered. So we have a few minutes left. I would like to ask if the audience has any questions from our panelists, anything that you'd like to inquire about. Any ideas? All right. Just inform me that we do not have time. So I would like to thank my panelists very much for their thoughts, their ideas. Thank you very much. This was, for me at least, a very exciting discussion, and I thank you for that. I thank our audience as well for their participation. I hope we conveyed some good ideas to you. I wish you a pleasant end of the conference, and I look forward to speaking with you or meeting with you at a later date. Thank you very much.